Let's bring in our friend of the pod here. He's going to help us break this all down. Joe Rubin. Joe, it's good to see you, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Joe, we were talking about this off air about the age of people not talking what they know about. The tagline of this show, Joel, is we talk to people who know what they're talking about. You, sir, you know what you're talking about. So thank you, first off, for hopping on the program. And let's get right into this, Joel, because these last couple of days has been a whirlwind in terms of what has happened, not only out of the Pentagon, out of the White House, about these boat strikes. It went from it's a hoax to no, it happened, but somebody else gave an order to what's the difference? We can keep doing this if we want. And, we just had a member of Congress on, Johnny Ocheski, who's on the House Foreign Affairs Committee talking
Johnny
about.
O.
Yep, Johnny O, the congressman. That's right, out there.
So I'm a Maryland guy, so he's Johnny O.
I know you are, and we're gonna play a clip of something that he said in just a second. But let me ask you, just at a high level, because you worked at the State Department, seeing the designation of these folks to narco terrorists by the State Department. What do you make of that? Why is this important, Joe? Like, do you agree with the designation? Do you agree with the motives of the administration to tackle narco terrorists or the people that are trafficking drugs into this country? What is it that you agree with or don't disagree with, seeing what's happening at your old employer?
Well, Mike, there are a lot of layers to this, and I'll see if I can unpack it in a way that is succinct. First and foremost, I believe we're in a slow motion regime change policy right now towards Venezuela. And what that means is that we are taking actions that can begin to provoke the kind of dynamic where we end up engaging in offensive military action into Venezuela. And there's a variety of ways to get there. And professionally, I worked in that famous regime change war that was unprovoked called the war in Iraq when I was at the State Department working in military affairs at the beginning of my career in the Bush administration. So I've seen this movie before where we see the administration create predicates, and they use those predicates to justify to the American public the rationale for going to war unprovoked. And that's what I'm afraid we're witnessing now with the concept of narco-terrorism. First of all, there is no legal term, narco-terrorists. There are terrorist organizations, foreign terrorist organizations. There are state sponsors of terror as well, like Iran or Sudan in the past. These are all legal terms and defined as such, and those enable actions to be taken by the executive branch to counter them, maybe sanctions, maybe breaking up their illicit networks of trafficking weaponry, maybe intelligence operations, occasionally military action in the case of against ISIS. But there's no such thing as a narco-terrorist. Where we have historically been encountering narcotics trafficking, and it is a problem, it is always a problem, is that we have used law enforcement through a mechanism called international narcotics law enforcement activities. We have a bureau at the State Department that does that. It engages with our Coast Guard, it engages with our civilian police, it engages with our military to interdict, and those entities engage international partners and allies so they arrest such boats. And that's not what we're doing. We're actively conflating the two. What we are doing is we're putting a wartime designation onto a civilian activity, conflating it and then acting upon it without any legal authorization. Nothing from Congress, no authorization to use military force, no War Powers Act invoked, which is what the president should have done. He says he doesn't want to do it. Literally no authorization, unauthorized military action against entities that are not designated for being on the receiving end of military action, all in the service of, again, what I believe is a slow-moving regime change policy.
Joel, to that end, two things come to mind. First is, there's already been, we're hearing about people who may have been on these boats who may have had nothing to do with drug trafficking. What becomes of the international outcry of that? And at the same time, what is the value of Venezuela to the United States if regime change is the goal for U.S. foreign policy?
Take the last one first. First and foremost, Maduro is a bastard. I don't know if I can say it on your program, but I'll say it, right? He's a bastard, a badass, a dictator, an autocrat growing out of the Chavez regime. The Venezuelan people have suffered beyond too much. 8 million or so have fled the country or been basically refugees and internally displaced as well. A quarter of the population. No, in Florida, there's a massive community of Venezuelans that can't stand Maduro with good reason, right? But you don't get at Maduro through this sort of unicorn policy of let's just go in and take him out, and somehow the country will just respond positively. What you do is you have to have collective international action where we are playing a key central organizing role in order to counter all of his illicit behavior, to ensure that sanctions are placed on him and his people, to ensure that they are not exporting drugs, to work with the neighbors in that regard, to make sure the Venezuelan people are not suffering unnecessarily, and to wean him out of power over time. Because we've learned a lesson as Americans the hard way, which is that when we go in and we try to replace one government with another, we usually screw it all up. And we usually make it a hell of a lot worse. And so that's the backdrop for where I'm coming from. And I think from the American perspective, encountering narcotics, just to this other part of it, it's the highest of priorities, right? So let's do it. But that these interdiction efforts are going after cocaine that's not even headed to the United States, according to reports. The fentanyl crisis is not a crisis being exported by Venezuela. It's got base materials being generated in China, potentially sent to Mexico and transited over there, as well as developed and produced here in the United States. That's a fentanyl crisis. Let's do something about it. Let's not cut, as I believe we've done, aid to fentanyl victims. Let's reduce demand here at home, and let's go after and choke off the supply routes with our partners, not going after drug exports that are not even fentanyl, that are not even going to the United States, which is what we're currently watching.
I know a lot about the Venezuela part of this. I live obviously in Miami down here. My goddaughter's Venezuelan. I worked for a Venezuelan company when Chavez died and Maduro and what he promised to the Venezuelan people, and to see, what I think it was like 13, 14 years later, he's actually done more of the same, if not worse, like you said, Joel. So I want to pivot though, just real quick, into something that is, again, in your wheelhouse, which is the communication aspect of this and communicating to the American people. You're laughing. You and I have a few comms folks that are friends of ours, between the Megan Hayeses and Marie Harfs of the world. And I'm watching this play out over these last 7 or 8 days. The communications first from the White House, and then just as we're recording today, you're hearing this the next day out there, is what we saw with the cabinet meeting and from Hegseth's mouth and Rubio's mouth. So let me just play for a couple of the clips here for you, Joel, and I wanted to get you to react on the other side. So take a listen to this.
The administration either confirm or deny or reveal whether or not there were survivors after that initial first strike, and what imminent threat would 2 survivors pose who were clinging presumably to the wreckage of that boat?
Again, as I said, I think you guys are sort of not listening fully to the statement I've provided. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was totally destroyed and the threat to the narco-terrorists, to the United States, was eliminated. And for any further questions about his thinking, I would defer you to the Department of War. I obviously wasn't in the room.
Allowed them to come across the border, cartels take over community, 20 million people, hundreds of thousands of Americans poisoned. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we're stopping the drugs, we're striking the boats, we're defeating narco terrorists, and we're standing.
And you may say one thing, that drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%. And I don't know who the 9% is.
I'm not sure either, sir.
But down 91%.
So, Joe, here's the problem that we have, and I got a 2-parter for you. The first part of this is that, as we talked about when we were coming on air, that there are a lot of people that don't know what they're talking about that are talking about this, right? So I'm asking you the question around the communications aspect of this, because in the first clip, you hear Caroline Leavitt say, well, I wasn't in the room and here's a statement and I would point you to them, after all of the misinformation or whatever it was they were saying about the initial boat strikes. Then you get the cabinet perspective from Hegseth there and President Trump. Now I got to look up if that stat is even true about 91% of boats. That's the problem with what's coming out of the administration. So I would love for you to talk about. I'd love for you to talk about that aspect of what's coming out there from a comms perspective and how that could be tackled. But the second part of this, Joel, is why does this matter? Why in the broader context, why does this matter? Why is Mike and Nick from Can We Please Talk spending so much time with a former Bush and Obama administration official talking about these boats that were blown up? They're just drug dealers. Why you guys support drug dealers? We're just blowing them up. You know, what's the difference? They're selling drugs. Why is this important, Joel?
Because, Mike, our country has learned the hard way about what happens when the commander-in-chief lies to us about their motivations for military action abroad. We've gone through this already once. We did it in Iraq. It was calamitous. It was never ending. It was multi-year. There are tens of thousands of American service members living with wounds, loss of limbs, PTSD to this day and for decades more. The Middle East was flipped over on its head. Iran gained access to the Arab world and it advanced itself deep into the region. The Iraqi people suffered hundreds of thousands of deaths. American prestige was blown. What I don't want us to do is the same damn thing in South America. There is no need for that. There is no rationale for it. If the president and his team can feel confident in their policy, they should be able to communicate it clearly, overtly, and cleanly in a manner that they can then sell to Congress to get the buy-in from both chambers that reflects the will of the American people. That's how we need to do these kinds of operations. But if you get the kind of squirrely thing where this press secretary says, well, yeah, we have a Secretary of Defense and Commander-in-Chief, but it's actually this uniformed military guy who made the call. And then you have the Secretary of Defense saying, we should kill everybody. And then you have the president saying, well, it's 9/10 down in the same meeting where he's saying there's no affordability crisis, which you all know is bunk. We basically have no idea about what's going on. And that's what I'm deeply concerned about. These are American lives, American military personnel, American military hardware that costs a lot of money that you and I, we all pay for. That is to be treated with respect. And there is a process to demonstrate that respect. These are not toys to move around. I just want to give one other insight here from my experience also. When I worked on this in the Obama administration, I worked as the senior official for the State Department, handling relations and work with the House of Representatives. The job title is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs to the House. So that basically meant every day I was like sitting at this intersection between state and the House. Where they crash, I was in the middle. My head was exploding every day, right? But what we did was we would go up to Congress all the time and brief them and share with them information with both sides of the aisle on issues of war and peace, in addition to a whole myriad of diplomatic issues. And when a moment like this were, if it were to have happened, what we would have done is we would have gone up and briefed the senior leadership of the House, the leaders of the committees that mattered, the Foreign Affairs Committee, Armed Services, Intel, and told them what is happening, why we're doing these things, what actions we're taking, what the authorities are. They can't even get a damn briefing. Now, they might get one in a couple of days, but they're going to get a general who's already been fingered by the President and Secretary of Defense to speak after the fact. There's no justification for what's happening. And so that leads to your comms question, which is, I don't hear a communications plan that is unfolding in a strategic way that informs the American people, those of us who are actually paying for these actions. I hear a comms plan that is reactionary, that is responsive, that is sort of putting out fires, that is trying to pass the buck and dissemble. And that to me makes me feel just like what we had 20 plus years ago in Iraq. We are being sold something rather than spoken to, and that's very dangerous.
This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20, all one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast. So I alluded to Congressman Johnny Olszewski out there in Maryland. He came on the program. I mentioned about that he's on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I asked him, Joel, and I want to ask you the same exact question, but I want you to hear how he responded to it, which is really about, so what comes next? Because they're not informing Congress, like you said, that bridge. They're circumventing Congress. So what do we do about it? What does Congress do about it? I want you to hear how he responded. Take a listen.
Congress has a responsibility. That is how the framers created our government, is to be co-equal branches. We're supposed to hold the executive branch accountable if they overstep their authority. And so we're going to keep pushing for that accountability and that process through things like war power resolution. We're going to keep pushing through letters. We're going to keep calling in not just the Congress, but also the courts and in the community, and encouraging Americans to call into the representatives and senators who are supporting this without really giving it any thorough review, basically giving the president a blank check to do whatever he wants on military targets, creating military targets. Again, we don't know if these are combatants, innocent civilians, et cetera. So I will say, though, if Americans are frustrated with the lack of oversight, the lack of accountability, that the best way to do that is to be organized. We're now less than a year away from the next election. And so being in a place where you have your voices heard in Congress's ability to do or not do something is where voters will ultimately, it's the ultimate expression of someone's opinion. But in the meantime, I think engaging with that process to say to representatives, like, thank you for pushing the administration, or in the cases where senators and congresspersons are not, say, why aren't you holding the Trump administration accountable here?
So, Joel, is that a satisfactory answer in your estimation, given what you know working not only in the chambers of Congress, but obviously at the State Department? Like, for us that's listening to this and watching this play out, it seems like, and you just said it before, the administration is just kind of circumventing, like what he said, which is this co-equal branch of government. So if they're not going to listen to it, what are we doing here? This is all like, what are we doing in all of this? Is he right? Is he wrong? What do you like about that answer? What you didn't like about that answer?
Well, I'll give you the bad answer, the negative response first. The one which is the little secret in Washington, which is the worst kept secret about the commander-in-chief, is that the commander-in-chief has extraordinary authority to do what he or she wants. So what he, in Donald Trump's case, wants to do, he can do. He can basically do it right now. And I served in the department again at a time where, and it's surreal feeling, Mike. I got to tell you, when you're working in the executive branch and you're in the military component, be it at state or the intel community, DOD, but you're in that component that's dealing with issues of war, there is a sense of impunity there that is pervasive, that basically you can do whatever you want. We have the biggest, most powerful military, and we will do what we want, right? The president says we want to go to Trinidad and Tobago and land, says he wants to shut down airspace over Venezuela. We're doing it. And literally, who's going to stop us? The UN troops? The minority party in the House? Right? And so that's what's happening inside right now. And there sort of creates a sort of emotional self-justification, and it's like a runaway train. That's the bad side. That's what we're looking at. The only way to counter that is what the congressman said, but at a heightened level from what he said. It can't be wait till next year. Hopefully we'll do well in the election. Of course, we can use that as a Democrat for a good election argument if we want, but how many people are going to vote about Venezuela when it's this esoteric? If it's a real war, that's different. But even on issues like Ukraine and clearly on Israel and other foreign policy issues, when an acute response occurs, and we saw it when the initial peace proposal was floated, the Putin-ridden peace proposal, members of Congress freaked out from both sides of the aisle, and it was big and it mattered. Same thing is starting to percolate now. And that's the optimistic side, where these killings, this September 2nd boat strike, has elicited real concern amongst whom? First, the retired brass and the current brass of the military, the guardians of our country, the patriotic, loyal American service members who are at the top ranks, who do not want to violate the law of war, who do not want to see their colleagues get sent to The Hague, who do believe that there are ethics in the way we prosecute our military activities abroad. Those people have spoken up. You see it filtering through the system. You see the members of Congress saying, don't follow illegal orders. You see both sides of the Congress and Republicans and Democratic leaders of the Armed Services Committee saying, we got to do oversight in that. So that's what has to happen. And that has to be built upon. It has to be heightened. It has to become very acute. And if it's not, there will be a carte blanche for President Trump and his team. And they'll say, we have a free pass. And that's where I think for Johnny O, he's right. But that means it needs to be executed now, not a year from now.
Great. We ended it on that, Joe. You brought us down. But you know what? If you want to learn more,
you've got to be like me.
Yeah.
It's how I feel every day.
Exactly.
No,
but if you want to learn more about this, as we were talking before we came on, you feel uneducated out there, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to substack.com. You're going to type in the briefing book. You're going to subscribe to Joel's Substack because the man has subject matter expertise, domain expertise in this. We're going to start listening back to the subject matter experts. That's why Nick and I started this show. And that's why we have people on like Joel Rubin. Joe, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the podcast, buddy. Continue success with the Substack. Please stay safe. I'll see you out there on these TV panel streets.
Brilliant. Mike, Nick, thank you guys. I really, really am grateful for you having me on tonight.
Hey, everybody. Mike Leon from the Can We Please Talk podcast. Thank you so much for watching this clip. Do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Going to get more content from us over at Can We Please Talk.